I'm Barbara Lucas, and welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental topics that green up our world. Today's guest is Erica Briggs, a doctoral candidate in political science at Michigan State University. Today we're going to be talking about the Vision Zero goal that was adopted by the Ann Arbor City Council. Erica, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you're on the boards of the Washtenaw Bicycling and Walking Coalition and also of the Michigan League of Bicyclists.
That's correct.
So I'm sure you've been hearing about these somber statistics that in 2014 in Michigan, 148 pedestrians and 21 bicyclists were killed when hit by cars. And in the 5-year period 2010 to 2014, Ann Arbor averaged 55 pedestrian crashes per year. So the Vision Zero initiative seeks to change that. What is their goal?
Well, Vision Zero sets a vision that will have zero traffic fatalities. And this is not just pedestrians and bicyclists, but motorists as well. Across the United States, there's 30,000 people who are dying every year in traffic fatalities. And what Vision Zero says is that this is simply unacceptable. There should be a goal of zero loss of life on our streets, and that we should stop defining them as traffic accidents and start looking at them as crashes, preventable crashes, and also further, suggesting that we have some control over this in terms of our system design and also in terms of our behavior as users, that we can shift our behavior so that we're not seeing this sort of loss of life. It's unnecessary.
Now, nobody likes loss of life, right? So how is this different than what we've currently been doing?
Well, although safety has been a feature of our transportation system, it hasn't been the priority. And so the priority has really been on capacity, making sure that we're moving as many people as we can, as efficiently as we can, as fast as we can. And so when you put the prioritization there instead of on safety, when it comes to difficult decisions, we're always trying to move more people as fast as we can. And this is, and so it's a fundamental shift in our prioritization.
Paradigm shift.
Yeah, it is.
So when and where did it start?
So it started in Sweden in 1997, and they've seen it to be quite successful there. In the past decade, there's been a 50% reduction in pedestrian fatalities there. And it has rapidly spread, of course, then to other parts of the world. I think there are 10 cities in the United States that have, maybe 11 now, Ann Arbor.
Great.
Yeah, that have officially adopted it, and a number of large cities where they're seeing dramatic numbers of fatalities, like New York and Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA. Those were early adopters.
Great. So one of the things that they talk about a lot are car speeds. What does Vision Zero feel about car speed?
Right. So we've all heard speed kills, and for a lot of us it's just a slogan. We don't think about it very much, but when we reduce our speeds and when drivers reduce their speeds, it can have dramatic results. So for example, if a pedestrian's hit by a motorist traveling 20 miles per hour, there is a chance of 1 out of 10 that pedestrian might die. But if the car is traveling 40 miles per hour, it's 9 out of 10 pedestrians would die in that situation. And so it really Vision Zero it focuses pretty dramatically on speeds and lowering them. It's not its only goal, but it is a part of the solution in terms of how we fix this problem.
So I've often heard people seem to agree that it's not enough to just lower the speed limit and post it, that the environment has to be changed. And what are they referring to? Right.
So there's been a lot of controversy around this about how much the posted speed limit matters. But what we do know is that fundamentally roadway design is probably what's most important. So as pedestrians, bicyclists, but mostly as drivers, we're really looking at cues in our environment. And so when we have wide open spaces, our speeds tend to increase. And when we see a narrowing in the environment, for instance, if we're in downtown Ann Arbor, where the buildings are closer, there's more pedestrians, there's trees, there's canopy, there's a lot of visual sort of stimulation. Naturally, we're not looking actually to see that the speed limit there is 25 miles per hour. Our speed actually lowers. In fact, Main Street's a great example, because if you're coming in off of M14, you're kind of at highway speed, and you don't really recognize that the speed limits have dropped until you get until maybe Huron, maybe a little sooner, maybe Miller. So it's quite an important factor.
Yeah, and it makes it really influences how you use a roadway. For instance, there's Bluffs Park there,
Right.
and I've tried to cross Main Street to get to it, and you're taking your life into your hands there.
Right. We need to focus in on what we want out of our community, and we want to be able to access the parks. We want to be able to access the river. We want to be able to let our kids walk to school and feel comfortable enough ourselves getting on our bikes and traveling someplace via bike and not feeling unsafe by the environment that's around us. And we also want to know that when we get in our car and drive it, that the environment is designed so that we're not going to hurt somebody along the way. So
benefits everybody, whether you're a
correct.
motorist or not.
Yep.
Another thing I've heard a term is called human scale environment, that makes people drive more slowly. What's that all about?
Right, so human scale is particularly important for pedestrians. If you look at where you'll see higher pedestrian activity, it's in some place like a downtown where the scale of the buildings and the features around them, like the awnings, there are benches, there's trees. The environment around is conducive for a person, and it feels like you're welcome there. And when you get out into, if we just look at think of a typical suburban environment with strip malls, that's really not at a human scale. We see the vast open parking lots and the wide streets, and those are welcoming for pedestrians. It decreases the amount of people who'd like to walk there or bike there, but also as when we're in our cars, our goal really, typically, unless we're just trying to access a grocery store that's on there, is to get through that area as fast as we can to our next destination. So our focus is on speed.
It makes me think of the Lower Town area, which used to be a residential area, and it used to have buildings on either side of Broadway, and now it's mostly parking lots around in there, except for a few scattered buildings. And it seems to me people really go through there fast. And when I've really noticed it is when I'm trying to cross Broadway, people zoom over the bridge into town.
Mm-hmm. I think we can think of these examples all across town, and there are small tweaks that we can do to these locations. Part of it is about, part of it's big in terms of in Lower Town, for example, what gets built there and what gets redeveloped. Right now it's kind of a parking lot for the university. You know, we've talked about that. But there are also other things that we can do in terms of making it more accessible for somebody who's walking in that environment, making sure the crosswalks are visible for the people who are driving through that area, and also properly designed so that when you are trying to utilize them as a pedestrian, that you can actually get across the street quickly and safely. And there's a real problem in that area if you're a bicyclist trying to navigate that area as well. So it's really looking at the system and looking at the system design and reevaluating and making sure it's working for us as users, and that if we make a mistake, that the mistake doesn't result in the loss of life. And that's that paradigm shift that we're talking about. It is really focusing in on those system elements and figuring out what we can tweak, or maybe the big changes we need to make sure that it's safe.
Yeah, you mentioned the liability. Where it falls is an interesting concept. For instance, I was walking the corner of Huron and Division at night, and there were two people that were coming down Huron, and they turned onto Division and started walking in the street because there's construction there at Huron and Division, and it was really dark, and the cars almost hit these two people. And I thought to myself that a lot of people, if indeed they'd been hit, would have thought, well, you know, it was their fault. It was a really stupid thing to do. Well, I guess the Vision Zero initiative says that people do make stupid mistakes for whatever reason, and they do it fairly frequently, and we should be prepared, and that perhaps we should have had, well, let me throw that to you. What would Vision Zero say in a situation like that?
Right. Well, I think that there's some real easy fixes in those situations. The Pedestrian Access and Safety Task Force that was recently released, that is, one of the recommendations in there is to change how make sure that there's safe pedestrian access through a construction site. Mm-hmm. It's something that's not required in the city of Ann Arbor right now, to make sure that those accommodations are there. But when people are forced to make decisions, we don't always make the best ones. And so Vision Zero says that we really need to direct people. We need to make sure that it's very clear what their behavior should be, and that when they're traveling, we're putting them we're giving them safe choices to be making.
And of course, pedestrians have a big responsibility. We just got back from Ireland, and I was amazed how many people, in fact, it seemed to be almost all the people that were walking in the road would wear those bright neon yellow vests, because the roads are so narrow that the cars really have to see them. So,
yeah, I think I noticed when I was living in Germany that the kids' coats actually had reflective material on all of them. Some of this is nationally legislated, with mandates in terms of how our clothes are manufactured, and those are things that we have less control over at the local level, but there's certainly things that we can be educated about. I mean, I think we all know as pedestrians, we're supposed to be visible, but we don't really think about what that means and why that's important. And whether it's wearing a vest or just thinking, I'm going out at night, maybe I should wear something that's lighter colored rather than darker colored.
Definitely. When we were in Ireland, I was amazed that the drivers did seem to be fairly careful, and I checked on the rates. They do seem to be lower in Ireland, and it made me think of this statistic that they say that if more people are out on the roads, the drivers actually slow down. So an extension maybe because Ireland roads are kind of difficult for pedestrians, the drivers are really aware, whereas in the US, when we have these really wide open roads, like you said, people kind of get lax when they're driving. They're not trained to look for pedestrians.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting that the more people you get out there walking and biking, the safer it is for those people who are on the street. And there's been a lot of psychology experiments on this, actually. There's something that our brains actually do. There's a lot of visual stimulation that's out there in the world, and our brains are trying to help us. And when our brain is constantly pulling out things that we think are not relevant. And so in environments where you see a pedestrian rarely, our brain is, you see that our brain sees that pedestrian but pulls it out because it's not part of what it finds to be relevant. And so, that's a simplification of a lot of probably great research.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Oh, interesting stuff. So how does money figure into this? Some people might say, it's too expensive. We shouldn't bother with these kind of goals.
Well, fundamentally, I think that we care that our children, that our neighbors, that our colleagues, that we can get safely to our destinations. We all know of somebody who's died in a traffic accident, whether it's somebody who's close to us or a friend of a friend, or somebody who's been seriously injured, or we've had a close call, and that's critical. We need to prioritize that. We need to recognize that this is something that we can have, that these accidents are preventable, and that there may be a cost to retrofitting our environment. However, there's also a lot of benefits. So we may spend money on making sure that if we're retrofitting an area to make it more accessible for pedestrians, that comes at a cost, but the economic benefit is really quite great. We know that research is showing that people prefer living in walkable, bikeable neighborhoods, that they're willing to pay more for homes that are in those locations. The businesses prefer to set up in towns that are walkable and bikeable and that have vibrant downtowns. And so there's a lot of tangible benefits as well that come with great economic opportunity when we make these decisions as well.
And the larger economics of it, by extension, the healthcare costs are, I guess, $22 billion a year for obesity-related illnesses? Right.
So, obviously we are fostering an environment that makes it easier for people to bike and walk and safer for them to do so. So the results, one can logically assume, and that there's some research backing this, that we're going to be lowering our healthcare cost as a result, the more people we get out there being active. But of course, the loss of life and injury, that has a huge economic cost as well. And so that is a huge part of Vision Zero as well.
And you just feel better, too, psychologically.
Right. Yeah, in fact, I was, in terms of stress, I was just looking at some research from MIT that said, as drivers who are in congestion and high stress sort of driving situations, their body exhibits the same sort of symptoms as if they had been skydiving. So it's really astonishing the level of stress that we're putting ourselves under as drivers. We don't recognize it. We know that we're rushing from place to place and we feel that, but we don't realize that part of that is how much we are having to take into account. And that's because the onus has been put on us as as individuals, well, if you hurt somebody, that's your fault. And of course it is, but when we don't have a system around us that's designed for safety, that's not all our fault. And so it's shifting that burden a little bit back to the city, which is a really remarkable thing for the city of Ann Arbor to do. And it's, we also know that, of course, if we can get out of our cars and walk and bike, that's great for our mental health as well.
Great. Sounds like a win-win all around. So how can people get more information about Vision Zero?
So Google's a great place to go. If you Google Vision Zero, you'll start seeing things pop up, whether it's from Sweden or from different cities. New York has really has a tremendous website that breaks down how do you implement something like this, because it's great to have this vision, but it comes down to really some really difficult tasks. And so they've laid that out that's really easy for somebody to come upon for the first time. Seattle has a nice plan as well that's pretty accessible for somebody to read for the first time. And then, of course, there's things like our local reports, the non-motorized transportation plan, or the pedestrian safety and access task force report, which are easy to access on the city's website.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for
being here today. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah.
For an online archive of today's show, go to ewashington.org/greenroom. Thanks for joining us here in the Green Room.